I woke up to the sound of my fence being chainsawed at 6 a.m., but that wasn't even the worst part. By the time I stumbled outside in my boxers, Brenda Thornfield, my HOA president neighbor, was spray painting bright orange X's across the remaining fence posts, while her hired contractor kept cutting. The metallic rattle of the spray can mixed with the screaming chainsaw and splintering cedar created a symphony of destruction that had my neighbors peeking through their curtains. The acrid smell of two-stroke exhaust and fresh paint fumes burned my nostrils as sawdust settled on everything like toxic snow. I could actually taste the bitterness in the back of my throat. Brenda stood there in designer yoga pants and a safety vest, supervising the demolition of my 6-foot privacy fence like some deranged construction foreman. "Your fence is 2 inches too tall," she screamed, waving a crumpled HOA violation notice. "It ruins my mountain view and violates community standards. 20 feet of my Memorial Garden fence, gone." What would you do if you caught your neighbor destroying your property at dawn? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever dealt with a neighbor from hell. My name's Marcus Delacroix, and 6 months ago, I thought moving to Pine Ridge Estates in Colorado would be my fresh start. I'm a 52-year-old electrical contractor who just lost my wife Sarah to cancer after a 2-year battle that drained our savings and broke my heart. The life insurance money bought me this modest ranch house sandwiched between 2 McMansions, and I figured a quiet suburban neighborhood was exactly what I needed to heal. The fence Brenda was destroying, I'd built it myself as therapy. Every board hammered into place helped work through my grief. The rhythmic thunk of the nail gun, the rough texture of cedar under my calloused hands, the sweet smell of fresh wood stain. It was all part of building something beautiful for Sarah's memory. Behind that fence was her memorial garden, where the scent of her favorite roses mixed with lavender on summer evenings. But apparently, my 6-foot privacy fence was blocking Brenda Thornfield's $1 million mountain view. Meet the HOA president from hell, 48 years old, real estate agent, drives a white Range Rover with Lux Lady vanity plates. She's got 2 spoiled teenage sons who throw parties that shake windows 3 houses down, but somehow their beer cans scattered across multiple lawns never warrant violation notices. Her investment banker husband travels constantly, leaving Brenda plenty of time to patrol our neighborhood like a designer-clad dictator. The targeting started my first week. She claimed my work truck violated commercial vehicle restrictions because it wasn't aesthetically compatible with neighborhood character. I asked to see that specific rule. She produced a binder thick enough to stop bullets filled with bylaws that seemed to multiply like rabbits. I parked in my garage. She complained about unsightly electrical supplies visible through the window. I hung a curtain. Then came the violation notices. Lawn 1 inch too tall, $50 daily fine. Garbage bins visible 30 minutes past pickup, $50 daily fine. Unauthorized outdoor storage. Because I left a rake against my house, $50 daily fine. Each violation notice arrived on expensive cream-colored paper that felt thick and important between your fingers, while Brenda delivered them personally in designer heels that click-clacked across my driveway like a countdown timer. Her overpowering perfume, some sickly sweet floral nightmare, would linger in the air long after she left, marking her territory like a territorial animal. When I'd sit down with my morning coffee to read her latest complaints, the bitter taste seemed to match my growing resentment. The cheap grocery store blend wasn't helping my mood as violation notices piled up on my kitchen counter. But the fence was Brenda's declaration of war. She claimed my 6-foot 2-inch barrier violated the 6-foot maximum height restriction and encroached 2 inches onto mysterious HOA common area that existed nowhere in my property deed. She'd hired a surveyor specifically to find violations after I ignored her friendly suggestion to voluntarily lower the fence. "This fence destroys property values and creates a hostile living environment," she announced during my first HOA hearing, held in her living room instead of the community center. The crunch of store-bought cookies on paper plates filled the awkward silence as board members, her sister-in-law Janet, and 2 elderly residents who clearly feared Brenda, nodded along like bobbleheads. When I presented evidence that 3 other properties had identical fence heights, Brenda dismissed it as technical mumbo-jumbo. When I pointed out the bylaws required 30-day notice for violations, not her arbitrary 72-hour deadline, she increased my daily fine to $300 for wasting the board's time. That's when I realized Brenda Thornfield had made a crucial mistake. She assumed I was just another grieving widower she could bully into submission. But Sarah hadn't just left me heartbroken. She'd left me with nothing left to lose. And sometimes, the most dangerous opponent is someone who's already lost everything that mattered. The war for my memorial garden was about to begin. Brenda's next move came with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to a snow globe. She arrived at my door the following Tuesday morning with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse, flanked by a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit clutching a surveyor's tripod like a security blanket. "Mr. Delacroix," she announced, pronouncing my French surname like it personally offended her. "This is Brad Hutchins from Precision Property Surveys. We're here to document your multiple HOA violations before pursuing legal remedies." The smell of Brad's aftershave mixed with Brenda's usual perfume cloud created a toxic fog that made my eyes water. As they tramped around my property, Brad's measuring tape made sharp snapping sounds every few feet, while Brenda dictated notes into her phone like she was reporting a crime scene. Fence height 6 feet 2 1/4 inches, maximum allowable 6 feet even, violation confirmed. Brad's voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. The poor guy was clearly being paid by the hour to legitimize Brenda's vendetta. But here's where Brenda made her first tactical error. She was so focused on building her case against me that she forgot about her own glass house. While she and Brad measured every inch of my property, I took a casual walk around the neighborhood with my phone camera. Something my late wife Sarah had always told me echoed in my head. "Marcus, bullies always assume their victims won't fight back." That's usually their biggest mistake. Turns out Brenda's own backyard was a goldmine of violations. Her decorative mailbox stood 7 feet tall, clearly over the 6-foot height restriction she was weaponizing against my fence. Her deck extension jutted 18 inches beyond her original permit specifications, and those commercial-grade landscape lights illuminating her prize-winning rose garden? Definitely not on the approved fixtures list. But the real revelation came when I spent my lunch break at the courthouse breathing in that musty smell of old filing cabinets while hunting through property records. The squeak of ancient microfiche machines became my soundtrack as I discovered something that would change everything. Pine Ridge Estate's architectural guidelines had never been properly filed with Jefferson County. Years ago, during my electrical apprenticeship, an old-timer had taught me that the first rule of any dispute is to check whether your opponent actually has the authority they claim. "Always verify the foundation before you build the house," he'd said. That advice was about to prove invaluable. When Brenda's 72-hour ultimatum arrived via certified mail, the envelope thick enough to feel expensive between my fingers, demanding immediate fence removal or facing $200 daily fines, I was ready with my counterpunch. I formally requested an emergency board meeting under Article 7 of the HOA bylaws, which required all disputes to be heard within 10 business days of a formal challenge. Brenda's response was predictably petty. She scheduled the meeting for 2 p.m. on a Thursday during prime working hours, ensuring minimal attendance. The location? Her living room again, complete with folding chairs that squeaked like dying mice every time someone shifted their weight. The official board meeting consisted of Brenda, her sister-in-law Janet serving as secretary, and 2 elderly board members, Dr. Hoffman, a retired cardiologist who kept nodding off, and Mrs. Hannah, a sweet grandmother who clearly just wanted everyone to get along. Brenda served store-bought oatmeal cookies on paper plates beneath a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my truck. The irony wasn't lost on me, discussing community standards in a room that screamed excess. Her official agenda was handwritten on the back of a Starbucks receipt, which told me everything about the professionalism level we were dealing with. "Marcus has repeatedly violated community standards," Brenda began, consulting notes on her iPhone like she was delivering a closing argument. "His fence destroys sight lines, reduces property values, and creates discord in our peaceful community." I pulled out my own folder, not as thick as hers, but infinitely more damaging. "Before we discuss my fence, perhaps the board should address these photographs of violations on your property, Brenda, starting with your 7-foot mailbox that exceeds the same height restrictions you're applying to my fence. The temperature in that gaudy living room dropped 10 degrees. Janet's pen froze mid-sentence. Dr. Hoffman suddenly looked wide awake. Mrs. Hannah made a small, "oh my" sound that spoke volumes about the power shift happening in real time. But Brenda didn't climb to HOA president by backing down easily. "Those are decorative elements that enhance property values," she sniffed, her voice taking on that entitled tone I'd grown to despise. "Completely different from your Fortress wall. Then perhaps you can explain why 3 other properties in our development have identical 6-foot fences that have never received violation notices? I spread photographs across her marble coffee table like playing cards in a poker game I was about to win. The mask slipped. Brenda's carefully controlled facade cracked, revealing the entitled bully underneath. This board has discretionary authority to address immediate threats to community standards, she declared, literally making up rules as she spoke. The vote was 3-1 against me, with only Dr. Hoffman having the courage to abstain after quietly reviewing my evidence. My fine increased to $300 daily for frivolous challenges and aggressive behavior during official proceedings. Walking to my truck, the crunch of autumn leaves under my boots sounded like Brenda's credibility crumbling. She'd won this round, but her desperation was showing. And desperate people make the kinds of mistakes that bring down empires. 3 days after that sham board meeting, Brenda dropped the legal nuclear option on my doorstep. The envelope was so thick with expensive letterhead that the paper felt like velvet between my fingers. Morrison, Kessler and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $500 just to answer their phone, demanded immediate fence removal, claiming my hostile structure created a pattern of neighborhood intimidation. But the real kicker? The letter was dated 2 days before our board meeting. Brenda had hired an attorney before even pretending to give me due process. She'd planned this legal ambush from the beginning, and the bitter taste of betrayal mixed with my morning coffee as I read her lawyer's threats. Then she escalated to county code enforcement. Officer Martinez showed up that afternoon, looking genuinely confused as he consulted his tablet. "Got an anonymous complaint about major unpermitted construction," he said, the autumn wind carrying the scent of dying leaves as we walked my property. Caller described extensive electrical work, structural modifications, the whole 9 yards. As Martinez inspected every inch of my perfectly legal fence, I could hear Brenda's heels clicking on her driveway next door. She was obviously watching and waiting for me to get busted. The metallic ping of his measuring tape echoed between our houses as he documented what I already knew. Everything was up to code. "Whoever called this in gave some pretty specific details that just aren't here," Martinez said, shaking his head. "Sounds like someone was hoping I'd find problems that don't exist. Sorry for wasting your time." But Brenda wasn't done. That evening I overheard her at the neighborhood mailboxes spreading poison to anyone who'd listen. "Marcus is one of those difficult types," she stage whispered to the Hendersons from across the street. "Lawyers involved now. Property values are going to tank if we don't handle this quickly." Time for my counterpunch, and I was aiming higher than she'd ever expect. Years ago, my commanding officer in Germany had taught me that the best intelligence comes from public records most people are too lazy to check. "Control the information, control the battlefield," he'd said. So I spent the next 2 evenings at the county courthouse, breathing in that musty smell of archived documents while digging into Pine Ridge Estate's corporate history. What I found made Brenda's legal threats look like tissue paper in a hurricane. Our HOA's articles of incorporation showed a pattern of missed filings and expired registrations. More damaging, I discovered shell companies registered under Brenda's maiden name that had received landscaping and maintenance contracts worth over $40,000 from our HOA fund. She'd been personally profiting from the very organization she used to terrorize neighbors. But the nuclear revelation came when I found correspondence between Brenda and county planning about a proposed commercial development on the common area she claimed my fence was encroaching on. Turns out she'd been negotiating to sell that phantom common area to a cell tower company, and my fence was blocking access to the proposed site. This wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about Brenda trying to cash in on a secret deal by removing any obstacles to her payday. Armed with this intelligence, I made my move. I contacted the 3 other neighbors with identical fence heights and shared what I'd discovered. Then I reached out to Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old widow who'd lived here longer than anyone, and the young couple facing foreclosure over their kids' playground equipment. By Thursday, I had something Brenda never expected: an organized resistance. We filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office about potential HOA fraud. I submitted evidence of Brenda's conflicts of interest to the State Real Estate Board, which could cost her professional license. And we requested a special meeting of all homeowners, not just the puppet board, to address irregularities in HOA governance and potential financial misconduct. The meeting was scheduled for the community center, not Brenda's living room, with proper notice to all residents as required by state law. For the first time since moving to Pine Ridge Estates, I felt the sweet satisfaction of turning Brenda's own rules against her. Friday morning brought the sound I'd been waiting for. Brenda's heels frantically clicking across her driveway as she rushed to check her mail. The certified letter from the Attorney General's office requesting her response to fraud allegations had arrived right on schedule. From my kitchen window, I watched her read it twice, her face turning the color of spoiled milk. The paper visibly shook in her hands as the reality hit her. The hunter had become the hunted. She'd tried to bury me with lawyers and bureaucrats. Instead, she'd given me exactly the documentation I needed to expose her entire operation. Sometimes the best defense really is a devastating offense. Next week's community meeting was going to be very interesting. Brenda's response to my Attorney General complaint was swift, vicious, and completely insane. Monday morning, I woke up to Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies serving me with a restraining order. According to her sworn statement, I had threatened and intimidated her during our last phone conversation, creating an atmosphere of fear and hostility that made her feel unsafe in her own home. The real genius of her scheme? She'd provided an edited audio recording that removed her own screaming accusations while leaving only my increasingly frustrated responses. To anyone listening to her carefully doctored version, I sounded like an unbalanced maniac threatening a helpless woman. The metallic taste of pure rage flooded my mouth as I read her description of me as unstable and potentially dangerous. "Sir, you need to stay at least 100 yards from Mrs. Thornfield's property," Deputy Collins explained, his handcuffs jingling as he pointed toward her house. "That includes her driveway, mailbox, and any common areas where she might be present." From her kitchen window, I could see Brenda watching with barely concealed triumph, probably already planning how to exploit my enforced absence. She didn't waste any time showing her hand. That very afternoon, an emergency HOA board meeting was called, one that specifically excluded me due to the restraining order. The hastily printed agenda, on cheap copy paper that felt rough as sandpaper between my fingers, contained one item: authorization of immediate fence removal due to ongoing safety concerns. The vote was unanimous, 4-0. Brenda had orchestrated my exile to ram through authorization for immediate demolition. The contract went to Thornfield Property Services, her brother-in-law's company naturally, with work scheduled for Monday when I'd be in Denver on a job. Cost: $4,200 plus a property lien if I didn't pay within 30 days. But here's where my military training kicked in. During my years as an Army communications specialist, I'd learned that enemy intelligence often reveals more than they intend. Brenda's restraining order contained a fatal flaw. She'd filed it using her business address instead of home address, technically invalidating the entire document. More damaging, she claimed our threatening phone call happened at 8:47 p.m. on a night when my cell records showed I was at grief counseling across town. My counterpunch started with attorney Sarah Blackwood, who was practically grinning as she reviewed the evidence. "Marcus, she just committed perjury on official court documents," Sarah said, the excitement crackling in her voice as papers rustled across her mahogany desk. "False statements and restraining order petitions are felony charges in Colorado, and this emergency meeting, excluding affected parties while using an invalid restraining order, violates 6 different state statutes." The real ammunition came from my deeper investigation into Brenda's cell tower scheme. Buried in county planning files was a preliminary lease agreement showing she personally stood to pocket $85,000 from the deal, money that legally belonged to the HOA Community Fund. She wasn't just power tripping, she was committing fraud to finance a private windfall. As I photocopied each damning document, the smell of toner and old paper filling my nostrils, I could feel the case building like an electrical current finding its path to ground. Every page through that machine was another nail in Brenda's coffin. Meanwhile, the community was waking up to Brenda's corruption. Mrs. Patterson had been sharing her Rose Garden horror story at the grocery store, and suddenly neighbors who'd suffered in silence were finding their voices. The young couple facing foreclosure started a Facebook group called Pine Ridge Property Rights that exploded to 60 members in 3 days. More importantly, Brenda's real estate business was hemorrhaging clients. 4 potential buyers had backed out after discovering the ongoing legal disputes and HOA irregularities affecting property values. Her professional reputation was imploding faster than a controlled demolition. Thursday brought the game changer I'd been hoping for. Dr. Hoffman, the elderly board member who'd been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Brenda's tactics, appeared at my door with a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. "Marcus, I've been documenting Brenda's violations of procedure for 3 years," he said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he passed me the evidence. "Unauthorized expenditures, rigged contract bidding, meetings held without proper notice. I can't be complicit in this corruption anymore." Inside was a treasure trove. Systematic documentation of financial irregularities, procedural violations, and abuse of power going back to when Brenda first seized control of the board. Dr. Hoffman had been waiting for someone brave enough to challenge her reign of terror. But here's the beautiful part. I wasn't going to stop Monday's demolition. Let Brenda tear down my fence on live television while thinking she'd won. Because what she didn't know was that I'd already contacted Channel 7 News about covering the controversial HOA enforcement action. Sometimes the best way to destroy a tyrant is to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves in front of the whole world. Monday morning was going to be very educational for Brenda Thornfield. Friday afternoon, while Brenda was probably polishing her victory speech for Monday's demolition, I made the discovery that would obliterate her entire empire. I was deep in the musty archives of Jefferson County's Secretary of State office, following a nagging hunch about Pine Ridge Estate's corporate status, when I found it buried in a misfiled folder thick with dust. Our HOA's Articles of Incorporation had expired on March 15, 2021, and were never renewed. The aged paper felt brittle between my trembling fingers as the magnitude hit me like a sledgehammer. Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had been operating as a legally defunct corporation for 3 years. Every violation notice Brenda had issued, every fine she'd collected, every board decision she'd rammed through, all of it was legally meaningless, no more valid than monopoly money. But the implications went deeper than just invalid enforcement. According to Colorado revised statutes, when a nonprofit corporation dissolves, its assets legally revert to state oversight. The $127,000 sitting in our HOA account didn't belong to Brenda's phantom board. It technically belonged to a dissolved entity with no legal right to exist. The metallic taste of pure adrenaline flooded my mouth as I photocopied every page, the whir of the machine sounding like a countdown timer to Brenda's destruction. She'd been running what amounted to a neighborhood protection racket, collecting dues and issuing fines with zero legal authority. More beautiful still, Monday's demolition contract was void before the ink dried. Thornfield Property Services had been hired by an entity with no legal standing to authorize the work. If they touched my fence, they'd be committing criminal trespass and property destruction, felony charges that no amount of HOA paperwork could justify. As I drove home through the gathering dusk, the scent of autumn leaves drifting through my truck windows, I made a tactical decision that would have impressed my old commanding officer. I was keeping this nuclear revelation secret until Monday. Let Brenda orchestrate her grand demolition spectacle while believing she held all the power. The more witnesses to her illegal act, the more devastating her downfall would be. This discovery transformed everything. Sarah Blackwood was going to have Christmas morning when I showed her this evidence. We weren't just challenging HOA overreach anymore, we were looking at criminal charges for operating an illegal collection scheme, misappropriation of funds, and potential fraud involving tens of thousands of dollars. But the psychological impact would be even more satisfying. For 3 years, Brenda had terrorized 43 families with the weight of HOA authority. Neighbors had paid thousands in invalid fines, lost sleep over meaningless violation notices, and lived in fear of her arbitrary enforcement. Learning that none of it had any legal foundation would be the most liberating news Pine Ridge Estates had ever received. I spent that evening in Sarah's memorial garden, the rough texture of fence boards under my palm and the lingering fragrance of late roses in the crisp air, planning the perfect trap. The fence that started this war was about to become the stage for Brenda's complete annihilation. Every violation she'd issued, every dollar she'd collected, every neighbor she'd bullied, it was all built on a foundation of lies. Monday morning, the demolition crew would arrive expecting routine HOA enforcement. Instead, they'd be stepping into a carefully orchestrated legal ambush 3 years in the making. Brenda thought she was destroying my fence to claim ultimate victory. She had no idea she was about to demolish her own life in front of cameras, witnesses, and law enforcement. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and she'd never see it coming. Saturday morning found me in attorney Sarah Blackwood's office with enough evidence to bring down a small government. The rich leather smell of her law books mixed with fresh coffee as I spread 3 years of documentation across her mahogany conference table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that finally revealed the complete picture. "Marcus, this is absolutely devastating," Sarah said, her voice containing barely restrained excitement as she examined the expired incorporation documents. "Not only has Brenda been operating without legal authority, but under Colorado's wrongful lien statute, every resident who paid invalid fines can recover triple damages plus attorney fees. We're talking about a potential recovery of over $400,000. That legal nugget hit me like lightning. I'd heard about wrongful lien laws during my contractor training, but never imagined they'd apply to HOA disputes. Basically, when organizations file invalid liens or collect unauthorized fees, Colorado law allows victims to recover 3 times their losses as punishment for the abuse. It's designed to make fraudulent collection so expensive that scammers think twice before trying it." Sarah pulled out a thick binder that smelled like fresh ink and determination. "Here's how we're going to coordinate Monday's operation," she said, her finger tracing a timeline that would synchronize legal, media, and law enforcement elements. Channel 7's Jennifer Walsh will arrive at 7:45 a.m. to cover what she thinks is a routine HOA enforcement story. At 8 a.m. sharp, I'll be there with injunction paperwork and the lawsuit we're filing simultaneously. By 8:15, when that demolition crew realizes they're about to commit felonies, this whole thing explodes in Brenda's face. The financial strategy was equally brilliant. Beyond individual recoveries, we were forming the Pine Ridge Property Owners Coalition, a legitimate organization to replace Brenda's phantom HOA. Residents would get their money back, property liens would be voided, and we'd establish transparent governance with actual legal authority. Sunday brought a neighborhood organizing session that felt like a revolution brewing in my backyard. Mrs. Patterson arrived with 15 years of meticulous records, her manila folders organized with the precision of a military quartermaster. The soft rustling of papers and occasional clink of coffee cups created a soundtrack of rebellion as neighbors shared their stories. "I've been documenting every violation notice, every phone call, every intimidation tactic," Mrs. Patterson said, her weathered hands surprisingly steady as she opened folder after folder. Brenda targeted single parents, elderly residents, and blue-collar families while ignoring identical violations by her wealthy friends. This is textbook discrimination. The young couple facing foreclosure, Jake and Maria Santos, brought their own evidence of selective enforcement. Their children's playground equipment had generated $3,200 in fines, while 3 board members had identical swing sets that were never cited. The pattern was so obvious it would make a federal civil rights case look easy. Dr. Hoffman provided the insider perspective that tied everything together. "Brenda's been rubber-stamping contracts without competitive bidding for 3 years," he explained, the moral weight of his complicity evident in his voice. "Her shell companies have received over $75,000 in HOA funds for landscaping, maintenance, and consulting services that were never properly authorized. By Sunday evening, we had something Brenda never expected, a unified community ready to fight back. 17 families had joined our coalition, armed with documentation that would make prosecutors salivate. More importantly, we'd coordinated schedules to ensure maximum witness coverage for Monday's confrontation. The media preparation was crucial. Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 had initially planned a simple human interest story about HOA enforcement disputes. Now she was preparing an investigative piece about systematic fraud, discrimination, and abuse of power. I'd provided her with background materials that painted Brenda as exactly the kind of neighborhood tyrant that makes for compelling television. But the real beauty of our plan was psychological warfare. Brenda expected me to show up angry and desperate, probably with a handful of neighbors for moral support. Instead, she'd face attorneys, media, law enforcement, and a community that finally understood the scope of her deception. I spent Sunday night checking and rechecking every detail, the taste of anticipation mixing with black coffee as I reviewed our coordinated timeline. Security cameras were positioned to capture multiple angles. Legal documents were organized for immediate service. Media contacts were confirmed. Even the weather was cooperating. Clear skies would provide perfect visibility for cameras. The one detail that kept me awake wasn't nervousness, it was excitement. After months of being Brenda's victim, tomorrow I'd become her judge, jury, and executioner. Every neighbor she'd bullied, every dollar she'd stolen, every lie she'd told, It was all coming due on Monday morning. At 6 a.m., my alarm would start the most satisfying day of my life. Brenda thought she was tearing down my fence to claim final victory. Instead, she was about to demolish her entire existence in front of witnesses who would remember this day forever. Sometimes justice isn't just blind, it's perfectly patient. Sunday night, Brenda made her final desperate move. At 11:47 p.m., my phone started buzzing with frantic voicemails that revealed just how unhinged she'd become. Her voice, usually dripping with condescending authority, now carried the shrill edge of someone whose world was crumbling. "Marcus, this is your last chance to resolve this situation amicably," her first message began. The words rushed and slightly slurred like she'd been drinking. "I'm prepared to waive all existing fines and drop the restraining order if you sign a voluntary fence removal agreement by midnight. After that, you'll face the full legal consequences of your actions." The second voicemail, left just 12 minutes later, revealed her growing panic. "I know you think you're clever with your little neighborhood coalition, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. I have connections throughout this county. Judges, commissioners, people who can make your life very difficult if you continue this harassment." By the fourth message, delivered at 12:23 a.m., Brenda had completely abandoned any pretense of professionalism. "You're destroying this community with your selfish behavior. Property values are plummeting because of your legal drama. Every neighbor you've dragged into this mess will blame you when their home equity disappears." I let every call go to voicemail, each recording becoming another piece of evidence for Monday's legal filing. The metallic taste of satisfaction mixed with my midnight coffee as I listened to Brenda's meltdown in real time. She was spiraling, making increasingly wild threats that would only strengthen our case, but her real desperation showed in the moves she made while thinking I was asleep. At 2:15 a.m., my security cameras caught her creeping around my property with a flashlight, apparently looking for any last-minute violations she could document. The sight of Pine Ridge Estates' HOA president prowling around in designer pajamas and Ugg boots was both pathetic and terrifying. Monday morning brought news that Brenda had spent the weekend trying to buy her way out of trouble. 3 different neighbors called to report she'd offered them cash payments to withdraw from our coalition. Mrs. Patterson got a particularly offensive visit where Brenda suggested her advanced age made her an unreliable witness who might want to avoid the stress of legal proceedings. The young Santos family received the most insulting offer, $5,000 to drop their discrimination claims and sign a non-disclosure agreement. When they refused, Brenda threatened to report their playground equipment to county code enforcement as an attractive nuisance that endangered neighborhood children. But Brenda's biggest mistake was trying to intimidate Dr. Hoffman into recanting his evidence. She showed up at his door Sunday evening with a bottle of expensive wine and a sob story about how the Marcus situation was destroying her real estate career and threatening her family's financial security. She actually had the nerve to suggest I'd misunderstood what I'd witnessed over 3 years, Doctor. Hoffman told me Monday morning, his usually calm demeanor replaced by righteous indignation. Then she offered me $15,000 to take a vacation during the legal proceedings. When I refused, she threatened to have me removed from the board for mental incompetence due to advanced age. The smell of burnt coffee filled my kitchen as I listened to these reports, my hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Brenda's weekend bribery tour had accomplished exactly the opposite of what she intended. Instead of buying silence, she'd given us evidence of witness tampering, attempted obstruction of justice, and age discrimination. Meanwhile, her professional life was imploding in spectacular fashion. 3 more real estate clients had canceled listings after learning about the ongoing HOA controversy affecting their property values. Her brokerage firm, Morrison & Associates, had quietly removed her photo from their website and stopped returning her calls. The Whisper Network in Colorado real estate moves fast, and word was spreading that Brenda Thornfield was toxic. Most satisfying was watching her social media presence crumble. The Pine Ridge Property Rights Facebook group had grown to over 100 members, sharing stories and evidence that painted Brenda as a neighborhood tyrant. Her own real estate Facebook page was being flooded with questions about HOA disputes and legal investigations that she couldn't delete fast enough. By 7 a.m. Monday, as I watched through my kitchen window, Brenda was pacing her driveway like a caged animal. The demolition crew's truck was already parked on the street, and I could see her frantically gesturing and pointing toward my fence. Her designer outfit was perfectly coordinated, but her body language screamed desperation. She had no idea that her carefully planned demolition was actually an elaborate trap that would destroy everything she'd built over 3 years. The taste of victory was sweeter than any morning coffee as I watched her check her watch repeatedly, probably wondering why more neighbors weren't gathering to witness her triumph. At 7:45 a.m., Jennifer Walsh's Channel 7 news van would arrive, followed immediately by my attorney with enough legal firepower to level Brenda's entire operation. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and she'd never see it coming. Time to watch an empire fall. At 7:30 a.m. Monday morning, Brenda made her final catastrophic mistake. As I watched from my kitchen window, she arrived at the demolition site wearing a crisp white blazer and her most expensive jewelry, clearly expecting this to be her moment of ultimate triumph. The sharp click of her designer heels on the asphalt echoed between our houses as she marched toward the crew like a general preparing for battle. What she didn't know was that her weekend bribery spree had backfired spectacularly. Dr. Hoffman had spent Sunday evening making calls to every board member who'd ever questioned Brenda's methods. By Monday morning, 2 more longtime residents had resigned from the Phantom Board and were prepared to testify about her systematic abuse of power. The demolition crew, 3 burly guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, was already setting up their equipment when Brenda began her performance. The acrid smell of chainsaw exhaust mixed with her overpowering perfume as she positioned herself for what she clearly thought would be her victory photo. "Gentlemen, you're here to remove an illegal structure that violates multiple community standards," she announced loudly enough for the growing crowd of neighbors to hear. "Mr. Delacroix has had ample opportunity to comply voluntarily, but has chosen confrontation over cooperation." From my position by the fence, I could taste the metallic tang of anticipation mixed with the bitter coffee I'd been nursing since dawn. Everything was falling into place exactly as planned. At 7:43 a.m., I spotted Jennifer Walsh's Channel 7 news van turning the corner, followed immediately by Sarah Blackwood's silver Mercedes. But Brenda's desperation was showing in ways she couldn't control. Her hands shook slightly as she consulted notes on her phone, and I noticed she'd applied her makeup with the heavy-handed precision of someone trying to hide exhaustion. The weekend of bribery attempts and midnight property prowling had clearly taken its toll. "Mrs. Thornfield," called out Jake Santos from across the street, "can you explain why your own mailbox exceeds the same height restrictions you're enforcing against Marcus's fence?" Brenda's face flushed red as more neighbors emerged from their houses, many carrying folders of documentation I'd helped them organize over the weekend. Mrs. Patterson appeared with her 15 years of meticulous records, while other families brought photos and violation notices that would expose the pattern of selective enforcement. "Those questions will be addressed through proper channels," Brenda snapped, her voice taking on that shrill quality that emerged whenever she felt cornered. "Today we're focusing on immediate safety concerns posed by this illegal barrier." That's when Jennifer Walsh approached with her cameraman, the professional smile of an investigative reporter who smells a bigger story than she initially expected. "Mrs. Thornfield, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're here to cover the HOA enforcement action, but several residents have raised questions about the association's legal authority. Would you care to comment?" The texture of smooth confidence that usually characterized Brenda's public persona began cracking like old paint. "The Pine Ridge Estates HOA has full legal authority to enforce community standards," she declared, but her voice carried a defensive edge that hadn't been there moments before. Meanwhile, Sarah Blackwood was positioning herself strategically near the demolition crew, a thick manila envelope in her hands that contained enough legal ammunition to stop this charade permanently. The morning sunlight glinted off her silver briefcase as she prepared to serve papers that would transform Brenda's moment of triumph into complete humiliation. But Brenda's final act of desperation came when she spotted Dr. Hoffman emerging from his house with a folder of evidence. "Don't listen to him," she called out loudly enough for the news camera to capture. "Dr. Hoffman is suffering from age-related confusion and doesn't understand the legal complexities of HOA governance." The collective gasp from the gathered neighbors was audible. Attacking a respected 78-year-old physician on camera was exactly the kind of mistake that would make this story go viral. Even her sister-in-law Janet, who'd been loyally supporting Brenda's crusade for months, looked mortified by the public display of callousness. The demolition crew foreman, A weathered man named Chuck, who'd clearly done this kind of work for decades, approached Brenda with increasing concern. "Ma'am, we're getting some conflicting information here about authorization. Maybe we should wait until—" "You have your work order!" Brenda cut him off, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I am the HOA president, and I'm ordering you to proceed immediately!" At exactly 8 a.m., as Chuck reluctantly started his chainsaw, Sarah Blackwood stepped forward with the legal papers that would end Brenda's reign of terror forever. The sound of approaching sirens, county sheriff's deputies responding to our trespassing complaint, mixed with the mechanical whine of demolition equipment to create a symphony of justice about to be served. Brenda stood there in her designer outfit, completely unaware that her empire was about to collapse in front of cameras, witnesses, and law enforcement. The trap was sprung. Now came the reckoning. At exactly 8 a.m., as Chuck's chainsaw roared to life and bit into the first fence board, Sarah Blackwood stepped forward like an avenging angel in a power suit. "Stop immediately," she commanded, her voice cutting through the mechanical noise as she brandished a thick stack of legal documents. "You are about to commit criminal trespass on behalf of an organization with no legal authority to authorize this work." Chuck killed the chainsaw so fast you could hear the sudden silence echo off the surrounding houses. The acrid smell of two-stroke exhaust hung in the morning air like the smoke from Brenda's burning credibility. "What the hell is going on here?" Brenda demanded, her perfectly applied makeup already starting to streak with perspiration despite the cool October morning. "Mrs. Thornfield, you are hereby served with a lawsuit filed this morning in Jefferson County District Court," Sarah announced, slapping the papers into Brenda's manicured hands with enough force to make them shake. "You are also served with an emergency injunction prohibiting any further property destruction." Jennifer Walsh's camera was rolling as Brenda's face cycled through confusion, anger, and dawning horror while she tried to process the legal documents. The gathered crowd of neighbors, now numbering over 20, pressed closer to witness what they sensed was a historic moment. "This is ridiculous," Brenda sputtered, waving the papers like they were contaminated. "The HOA has full authority to—" "Actually, it doesn't," I interrupted, stepping forward with my own folder of evidence. The taste of pure satisfaction flooded my mouth as I prepared to deliver the knockout punch. Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association's Articles of Incorporation expired on March 15, 2021, and were never renewed. For 3 years, you've been collecting dues and issuing fines on behalf of a legally defunct organization. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her mouth. Dr. Hoffman nodded grimly as if this confirmed his worst suspicions. Even Chuck and his demolition crew were staring at Brenda like she'd suddenly sprouted horns. That's impossible," Brenda stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would have known. The board would have been notified." "The board consists of you, your sister-in-law, and 2 elderly residents you've been manipulating for years," Sarah said coolly. "According to these financial records provided by Dr. Hoffman, you've collected over $127,000 in dues and fines from residents while operating an illegal collection scheme." Jennifer Walsh stepped forward, microphone extended. "Mrs. Thornfield, how do you respond to allegations that you've been knowingly defrauding your neighbors?" That's when Brenda completely lost it. The mask of suburban respectability she'd worn for 3 years shattered like glass, revealing the entitled, bigoted bully underneath. "This is a conspiracy!" she shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that made dogs start barking 3 houses down. "That French bastard has been planning this from day one. He's probably illegal anyway. Who knows what kind of background these immigrant types have?" The ethnic slur hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jennifer Walsh's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a reporter who'd just captured career-making footage. Chuck and his crew started packing their equipment with the urgency of people fleeing a disaster zone. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," said Deputy Collins, who'd arrived with sirens wailing just as Brenda's meltdown reached its peak. The metallic jingle of his handcuffs provided percussion to her increasingly unhinged rants. "I want him arrested." Brenda pointed at me with a shaking finger. "He's trespassing. He's harassing me. He's violating the restraining order." "Actually, ma'am, the restraining order was based on false information and has been invalidated," Deputy Collins explained patiently, while Sarah handed him copies of our evidence. "And Mr. Delacroix is on his own property. You, however, are authorizing property destruction without legal authority." The crowd of neighbors had swelled to over 30 people, many filming with their phones as Brenda's empire collapsed in real time. The sound of clicking cameras mixed with her increasingly desperate protestations as the full scope of her downfall became clear. "This community will be destroyed without proper HOA oversight," she wailed, mascara now streaming down her cheeks in black rivulets. "Property values will plummet. It'll be chaos." That's when I delivered the mic drop moment I'd been planning for weeks. "Actually, Brenda, this community is going to thrive for the first time in 3 years," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every witness and camera. "Because we're forming a legitimate property owners association with transparent governance, proper legal authority, and leadership that actually serves the residents instead of exploiting them." The cheer that erupted from the crowd was spontaneous and thunderous. Mrs. Patterson was crying tears of joy. Dr. Hoffman was shaking hands with neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years. Even Chuck gave me a thumbs up before driving away. Brenda stood in the wreckage of her reputation, surrounded by evidence of her corruption, facing criminal charges and civil lawsuits that would follow her for years. Justice had finally come to Pine Ridge Estates. 3 months later, the transformation of Pine Ridge Estates was nothing short of miraculous. The class action lawsuit against Brenda and her phantom HOA settled for $438,000, every penny paid by the liability insurance company that had unknowingly covered a fraudulent organization. The sweet taste of victory mixed with my morning coffee as Sarah Blackwood handed me my settlement check for $127,000 in damages and attorney fees. Brenda's personal reckoning was swift and merciless. The Colorado Real Estate Commission suspended her license for 3 years after finding gross negligence and fraudulent conduct. Criminal charges for operating an illegal collection scheme resulted in 18 months of community service, mandatory anger management classes, and $89,000 in personal restitution. During my contractor training years ago, an instructor had mentioned that Colorado's Consumer Protection Act allows prosecutors to seek triple damages against fraudulent schemes, a legal tool that made Brenda's penalties particularly devastating. Most satisfying, Brenda was forced to sell her McMansion to pay legal judgments. The Lux Lady Range Rover disappeared first, followed by the crystal chandelier and designer furniture. Her real estate career was finished. No brokerage would touch someone with her legal baggage. Last I heard, she'd moved to Phoenix for a fresh start, though her husband had filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and public embarrassment. The real victory was what we built from her corruption's ashes. The Pine Ridge Property Owners Association, properly incorporated, transparently governed, and actually legal, now serves 47 families with dignity and respect. Dr. Hoffman serves as president, Mrs. Patterson handles our meticulously documented finances, and I coordinate maintenance projects with the same attention to detail I once applied to electrical work. The $50,000 in recovered funds that couldn't be directly returned became seed money for something beautiful, the Pine Ridge Community Scholarship. Every year, we award $15,000 in college scholarships to local students pursuing law, social work, community advocacy, or public service. The program specifically supports first-generation college students and underrepresented communities, a legacy that honors every neighbor Brenda had bullied. My memorial garden became the heart of our transformed community. The fence that started this war still stands, every weathered board a testament to standing up against corrupt authority. Sarah's roses bloom more magnificently each year, their sweet fragrance mixing with the sound of children's laughter as neighbors gather on summer evenings. The rough texture of the original cedar reminds me daily that protecting yourself protects everyone who comes after you. Our annual Pine Ridge Community Festival now draws families from neighboring developments, drawn by stories of our transformation from HOA tyranny to genuine community cooperation. The taste of Mrs. Patterson's famous apple pie and the sound of acoustic guitar from our local talent show have replaced the bitter conflicts that once poisoned our neighborhood. Property values increased 12% since Brenda's departure. Eliminating a neighborhood dictator who generated constant legal drama proved excellent for home equity. 3 families planning to escape HOA harassment decided to stay. New residents specifically choose Pine Ridge Estates because of our reputation for fair, transparent governance that actually serves the community. The ripple effects extended across Colorado. Channel 7's investigative series won a regional Emmy and inspired reform efforts statewide. The legislature passed the HOA Accountability Act, requiring annual corporate status verification and mandatory transparency in enforcement. I've consulted on 23 HOA reform cases across 6 states, always pro bono, turning my worst experience into a force for positive change. The fence Brenda tried to destroy still protects Sarah's garden, but it's no longer a barrier between neighbors. We installed a beautiful memorial gate opening onto a community walking path, connecting individual properties into something larger and more meaningful. Children now play safely in the Santos family's playground, the same equipment that once generated thousands in bogus fines. As I write this, sitting on Sarah's bench with late summer roses perfuming the evening air, I can hear families enjoying the community we built together. Mrs. Patterson tends her expanded rose garden, now celebrated as a neighborhood treasure. Dr. Hoffman hosts monthly coffee gatherings where residents discuss actual improvements instead of arbitrary enforcement. This is what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough of petty tyrants. We didn't just defeat Brenda Thornfield, we built something better in her place. Got your own HOA nightmare? Share it in the comments and let's expose these neighborhood dictators together. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales about underdogs beating corrupt systems and building stronger communities. Next week, how a disabled veteran outsmarted a predatory towing company and got the entire operation shut down by the state attorney general.
That's all for today's HOA madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.